Sociologists ask two basic questions about human behavior. We ask a descriptive or empirical question, that is, what do people do? And we ask an explanatory or theoretical question, or why do people do what they do? And these two questions are interrelated. Empirical data lead us to form theories about the world around us, and these theories help us to interpret empirical data. Now, really, all scientific fields do this, whether we're the physical sciences or the social sciences. Just the topic of the actual question changes depending upon the subject. Also, like all scientific fields, sociology is about making claims based on facts and evidence. Now, another word for facts and evidence would be data. And in case you're wondering, that's not a typo up there. The correct way to word this would be what are data, not what is data. The word data is plural, the singular is datum, so that is grammatically correct. So what qualifies as data? Well, data come in two general forms, quantitative and qualitative. This is a very fancy way of saying that data can be measured and can be observed. In short, we can count things, and we can also describe things. Now, different fields rely on quantitative and qualitative data to different degrees, but all scientific fields do rely on both types of data. As a simple example, think about from the field of biology. We might describe the process of photosynthesis, or from chemistry, we might describe how a chemical reaction occurs. Similarly, we might measure the energy needed to move an object from one place to another, or we might measure the amount of time that it takes for cells to grow. These are examples from the physical and life sciences of measurements and observations. And social scientists similarly use both quantitative and qualitative data. Now, when we gather sociological data, we are looking for regularities and patterns. And in a related fashion, our focus is on aggregates, not on individuals. The N of one, in truth, is not very useful. The N of many is. Everyone has a best friend's cousin's mom's boss who is the exception to the rule. But that exceptional case, while it might be interesting and even valid to explore, ultimately is not what we're looking at. Ultimately, it is the broader aggregate trend we are interested in. Again, it's the same in other scientific fields too. There are always going to be outliers, but what we're really looking at are those regularities and patterns that come from the aggregates of the information we collect. All right, that's enough theoretical. The real question is, where do our data come from? Or, in other words, how do sociologists know what they know anyway? Now, there are multiple valid research methods in sociology, and each has its own sets of strengths and weaknesses. I'm not going to talk about all of them. Typically, the method selected is driven by the type of question being asked. What I'm going to look at here, and what we're going to explore in more detail when you come to class next time, are 5 of the most common methods used in sociology for gathering data. Those 5 methods include surveys. Surveys typically consist of questions that are in written or sometimes electronic format. Usually they're fairly closed-ended, although they don't have to be. Interviews. Interviews tend to be much more open-ended questions. Typically these are asked in person or on the phone or in some kind of direct conversation with the person being interviewed. Ethnography, also known as participant observation. This is a situation where we immerse ourselves in some social setting. Content analysis, when we use physical or virtual objects made by others. This might include newspapers, magazines, TV shows, websites, commodities, all sorts of different things. And secondary data analysis. And this is when we utilize large, often typically quantitative, data sets that others have collected. Many of these data sets come from government agencies or research-based nonprofits or entities like that. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but again, these are some of the most common that we'll find in sociology. Note that the first 3 of these listed involve direct interaction with human subjects, while the last 2 don't, and those are often called unobtrusive measures because we don't have to intrude into anyone's lives to gather our data. Now, when we interact with people, it's especially important that we do so ethically. All scientific fields deal with ethical issues at some point in their research. For sociologists, these issues almost always take center stage from the very get-go. Why? Well, at core, the social world is full of potentially sensitive issues. Spanning from people's identities and backgrounds to their experiences and behaviors, sociologists routinely gather information that could harm people if handled improperly. We'll talk about a few of those examples in class, What I want you to take away for the moment is simply that there are three basic principles of ethics involved in social research. The first of those is what we refer to as a respect for personal autonomy. And we deal with respect for personal autonomy by seeking informed consent and voluntary participation. In other words, we want our participants to know what it is that they're participating in and to directly agree, yes, I consent to participate in this particular study. Second, we want to establish beneficence. This is a really fancy way of saying that we want to ensure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And above all, we want to enact that principle that comes from the field of medicine, first do no harm. And then third, in our research, we want to seek justice. And by that what we mean is we want to select subjects in a fair and balanced way that doesn't burden certain groups or individuals with disproportionate risks while others reap the benefits of the research. We're going to explore these 5 methods that I mentioned a moment ago by thinking about how we might use them to study the educational system. As I mentioned, all approaches have particular strengths and weaknesses. Not all methods are suited to all questions, and often the strongest answers come from relying on more than one method to answer the question. This reliance on more than one method, by the way, is called triangulation. To help you prepare for class, I want you to take a few minutes to generate some questions on this topic. Some examples you might want to consider include, do private schools provide better education than public schools? Which are more effective modes of instruction, online classes or face-to-face classes? Why is a college degree so important? Is it that a college degree is the gateway to a middle-class life, or is it something else? And if it is, how exactly does that work? How does the school system condition our behaviors? Note that there are a lot of different kinds of questions we can ask. These are not the only ones. I'm hoping this just helps prime the pump. You might also want to start thinking about, of the different methods listed, and off the brief overview that you get from the textbook, which seem the most appropriate for answering these questions. Bring the questions you generate with you to class, as you're going to need them for the main activity we're going to be doing that day.